When my daughter was 3 months old, we had just moved into a new house. It was a quiet neighborhood, nothing creepy about it, just a fresh start for our little family. But within the first week, something happened that I still can't explain. One night, I was downstairs cleaning up while my husband was asleep. Our daughter was in her crib, and I had the baby monitor next to me. It was one of those video ones with night vision, so I could see her little chest rising and falling as she slept. And then, through the static of the monitor, I heard it. A soft whisper. At first I thought it was just interference, maybe picking up a neighbor's frequency. But then, clear as day, I heard a woman's voice. "Shh, go back to sleep, baby." I froze. The only people in the house were me, my husband, and our daughter. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. She was still there, sleeping peacefully. I ran upstairs, flung open the door, and found the room exactly as I had left it. No one was there. For the next few weeks, small things kept happening. I'd hear faint humming through the monitor when I knew the house was silent. Once, I walked in to find the rocking chair moving, just slightly, like someone had just gotten up from it. Eventually, things settled down. I never heard the voice again. But sometimes, when I check on my daughter at night, I swear I can still feel someone else in the room, watching over her. My mother told me about an incident that happened to her when she was a little girl during the Great Depression. She remembered it all her life as though it happened yesterday. My great-grandmother lived with my mother and the family then. The town where they lived was mostly farmland, and the railroad that ran through Tidgey's center of town. One day, a boyfriend of one of my mother's aunts, who happened to be a used car salesman, was feeling generous after a big sale and was celebrating with a few drinks. He handed my great-grandmother a $20 bill and told her to go spend it wherever she wanted. Excitedly, my great-grandmother decided to walk to the grocery store about a mile away to get treats for the family. In those days, $20 was like $2,000 to some people. She took my mother's hand and they walked to the store together. At the store, loitering outside were two rough-looking men, but they didn't pay much attention to them then. They got their few items, and when my great-grandmother handed the clerk the $20 bill, the two men peered inside and appeared to take notice of the change she was handed. My mother and grandmother walked out of the store calmly and started home. Across the fields. It was getting dark by now, and they had only walked a little way down the road when my great-grandmother suddenly looked frightened as she turned around to see a beat-up pickup truck with no headlights on following them. She grabbed my mother into a cornfield and whispered to her to get down as low as she could and to move as quietly and quickly as she could. They both moved deeply into the cornfield, and at one point, my great-grandmother whispered to my mother to lay down on the ground and not make a sound. My mother remembers seeing the light from a lantern or flashlight moving up and down and all around as she heard the corn stalks rustling as the two men kept searching for them. After what seemed like hours to a little girl, my great-grandmother told my mother to get up and they finished their journey home. In those days, the newspapers and radio often reported being assaulted and sometimes killed for a few dollars or pennies in their pockets. My mother would still shudder and cross herself for so many years when she told the story, thinking about what might have happened to a little girl and aunt. Her grandmother had those two men, found them in that desolate cornfield. I'm now an adult and haven't had any paranormal experiences in a long time. But as a kid, I had multiple shadow figures that watched me. The first one was a nondescript, lanky, black void that would stand in the corner of my room and watch me sleep. It was so tall, its legs went halfway up my wall, and the only way it fit in my room was bending its shoulders and head down. The feet were on the ground, the head, shoulders, and neck were on the ceiling. This one was the most common one I saw. I always slept facing my room, terrified of what may happen if I turned my back on it. If I got the courage to jump out of bed and turn on the lights, it would be gone. I turned them back off, still gone. I go back to bed, Still gone. Stuff like that wasn't every night, but fairly common for me. One time I was trying to sleep with my door open. I watched it walk through the living room, place its massive hand on the top of my door frame, and bid down to peer into my room. This one set me over the edge. I jumped out of bed and ran to turn my light on. Unfortunately, this thing was right next to the switch. By the time the light was on, it was gone, and I went to sleep on the floor of my mom's room. I would also see it occasionally in the hallway at night, but most times it was just in the corner of my room. The next shadow figure I encountered was attached to another person. My father had a lot of issues when I was a child and often only saw him once or twice a year. The first time I ever saw it was over summer break. My grandparents flew me out to their house, and I was going to be there for a few weeks. My dad wanted to see me. He sobered up and took a 36-hour train ride from Mexico to see me. The first few days were normal from what I remember, and all the days after my experience were normal. But that night may have been one of the most terrifying things I can think of in my memories. I was going to sleep in the back room. There was a shadow figure in the corner, but not the one from my mom's house. This one was smaller, probably taller than an average human, but nothing unnatural like the other one, except this one was much more detailed. It's hard to explain how a shadow can have detail, but I could tell he was well-dressed, like a three-piece suit. Well-dressed, had a goatee, and a massive top hat on. The presence of this thing set me on edge, but I had seen things before and just tried to go to sleep. As soon as I did, I woke in a dark hallway that stretched on as far as I could make out. After looking around, an ear-piercing scream erupted from every direction. A woman, dressed in all white with pale skin, floated into view far down the hallway. She looked in my direction and flew at me. In what felt like an instant, she was in my face, then flew straight through me. I woke up terrified, jumped out of bed and ran to the living room where my grandma and dad were talking. I stayed up with them until my dad went to bed and had no other incidents. Next spring break, my dad came to stay at my mom's house for a few days to see me because he couldn't afford a hotel. On the last night of his stay, he was on the couch in the living room doing stuff on his laptop. I was in my room with the door closed trying to sleep. After some time, my office chair, which was facing my bed, had the same hat man as last summer watching me sleep. Terrified by my last memories of him, I jumped up and turned on my light. No one was there, just an empty chair. I tried to lay back down with the light off, but he was back. This time I ran out of my room and asked my dad to do his work in bed. I went to the top bunk to sleep. That night I woke up on the bottom bunk looking at my chair. He was there, watching me, a sick and twisted smile strewn across his face. I couldn't move. I watched him remove his hat. As he pulled it up, it revealed a set of long horns. He had to lift the hat more than a foot to clear the rim of the hat from the tip of his horns. He placed it in his lap and continued to watch me. I don't know how long this went on, but I woke up on the top bunk in the morning. The next year my dad had gotten sober, and I never saw it again. Thinking back on why he did that, I can't really say. But maybe that was its way of saying goodbye, because my dad reverted back to his old issues after a few years, but that thing was never around when I saw him. I have more encounters, but these were my two frequent occurrences growing up, and I was happy to leave them in my past. But recently, my toddler has been waking up with nightmares, and it takes her a long time to calm down. It has got me wondering if the figures that followed me didn't stop watching, but I just couldn't see them anymore. I was a single mother in my mid-40s, and I had just moved to a new house with my then 4-year-old son, back when we were living in our hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania. We had only been there for a few weeks when one late night, there was a knock on our front door. My son was asleep on the couch, and I was still up unpacking and putting things away. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out to see a petite young woman standing and putting putting things away. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out to see a petite young woman standing and putting things away. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out to see a petite young woman standing and putting things away. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out to see a petite young woman shivering on our porch. I opened the door only as far as the chain latch on the door would allow and asked her what she wanted. She said she had locked herself out of her house and asked if she could come in and use the phone. I asked her where she lived, and she described an address and a house about a block away. And around the corner. Something about her story didn't seem right. She would have had to have passed at least a half of a dozen of houses, which I noticed had their porch lights on, and there was also a still operational payphone across the street. I didn't have any change to give her, and alarm bells were still going off about this. With my young son asleep in our living room, I was reluctant to let her in, but it was a chilly winter night, so I offered her a coat and my cell phone, which I handed out to her through the doorway. She took the coat and my phone. Then she called somebody, but walked to the other end of the porch where I couldn't hear her, so I closed the door after telling her to put the phone in the mailbox when she was done and to bring my coat back tomorrow. She left the phone, but never returned my coat. For several weeks, I got strange phone calls at all hours, people demanding to know who I was when I answered or simply hanging up. Approximately 2-3 months later, on the front page of Altoona's local newspaper was a picture of the young woman who had knocked at our door that night. She and 10 other suspects had been arrested in a major drug bust. I immediately got chills thinking back on that cold winter night. How she showed up in a sleeveless shirt after passing several homes in the neighborhood. I wonder what might have happened to me and my young son, if I had ignored my unease and suspicions, in spite of her seemingly helpless appearance. Anyone ever get this feeling that as they lay in bed, they're just being watched? Like the feeling something is there even though you can't see it. I've had my share of paranormal occurrences with having a disembodied breath in my left ear, to the sight of misty figures walking through my hall. I've also seen what appeared to be this solid white orb that moved about my basement. No camera was used. It was like a solid pearl moving around, and then vanished within seconds. The feeling I'm getting is like someone or something is there. Kinda like a predator or perhaps a stalker, I guess. I never see anything, never hear anything, but I just feel odd. I sleep with this blue lamp for ambience and to potentially catch a glimpse of whatever could be watching me. Perhaps I've watched too many paranormal videos, and my most recent video was on mimics in the Appalachian Trail, and before that, skinwalkers. Not sure how many people are into the paranormal here for real, but the ones that are, I need to know if you ever had this feeling, and has this feeling ever lead to you genuinely coming across what has been watching you. Our marriage was perfect. Nate and I were living the dream until that dreadful morning shattered everything. I woke to find our hands clasped as usual, but now grotesquely fused together. Our skin melded at the seams. In a panic, I woke Nate. As he regained his composure, he suggested a more rational explanation, though nothing could logically explain our bonded hands. Despite our efforts with lotions, oils, and ice, our skin remained inseparably fused. When I insisted we seek medical intervention, Nate concocted tales of potential horrors, invasive examinations, and unending lab tests. Reluctantly, I agreed to wait, swayed by his dark imaginings of what might happen if we exposed our condition. As hours turned into days, our merging intensified. Our forearms entwined with disturbing elasticity, our skin weaving together in a macabre tapestry. When our shoulders began to merge, I cried uncontrollably, grieving the loss of our separate selves. Nate's assurances sounded increasingly hollow. "Everything will be all right," he murmured, his smile chilling me to the bone. The ultimate terror began as our heads started to merge. Nate's memories flooded into me, unveiling harrowing truths. These were not only his memories, they were also the echoes of countless others, his previous victims. Each had been devoured just like this, their identities dissolved into Nate's existence. In this mingled consciousness, I could hear the whispers of those he had consumed, a haunting chorus of the damned resonating within the depths of our fused minds. Their voices, tinged with terror, recounted their final, desperate moments. With each moment, as our bodies grotesquely twist together, I vanish further, becoming just another echo in the cacophony of Nate's collected consciousness. This ordeal is not merely emerging, it's a total consumption of who I was. All my memories, hopes, and fears devoured by the entity that was once my husband. Now, as we stand before the mirror, I see not two reflections, but one monstrous fusion, a twisted figure that encapsulates a horror of many souls. Nate gazes at me, not with despair, but with a cold, predatory satisfaction as I let a tear fall, his guise of calmness giving way to the grim reality of our merging. The memories I've uncovered, hundreds of lives consumed, freeze my blood. Nate, this fiend, is nearly done consuming me. It's not death I fear, but the loss of who I am, the complete erasure of my essence. As our bodies grotesquely intertwine, my individuality slips away, consumed by the overwhelming darkness of Nate's monstrous soul. I hear the voices of previous victims, echoes trapped deep within him, a chilling reminder of the fate that awaits me. This happened 7 years ago, but I still remember this vaguely. It was spring break, and my friend, who I'll call Carter for privacy reasons, invited me to sleep over for a night or two. My parents dropped me off, and me and Anthony just stayed in his basement playing Fortnite or whatever. After my parents left, Carter's parents said they were going to be out of town for the weekend and somehow trusted us to stay alone for the weekend. Me and Carter looked at each other with this excited and determined look, like we were going to do stuff his parents wouldn't allow. After they said bye, me and Carter brought food down in his basement, mostly junk food, sodas and whatnot. We were 12. This was the stuff. We got bored playing video games, and Carter thought it was a good idea to prank call random numbers. I only did a prank call once with my older brother, and I sucked at it. I dialed a few random numbers until someone picked up. After like 4 tries, some guy sounding like he was in his late 30s saying, "What?" instead of "hello." Anthony was holding in his laughter, which made me stutter and laugh mid-sentence. After I got a straightened face, I said some corny question like, "Sir, is your refrigerator running?" "Off." He said, "Yes." And then you can guess W. "Hot." I said next was, "Then go catch it then." Silence. For like 5 seconds. Then the man said, "What's your name, kid?" I said, the first name that came to mind. It's Joe Y." "Oh really? Are you sure it's not Carter?" My smile turned into horror, as so did Carter's look. I hung up, and I asked Carter if his name was in his contact name, but it was his dad's. How the hell couldn't he get Carter's name, though? We searched it up in Google. No answers. Just... Then we heard a huge crash from the kitchen window. Someone broke the window. Me and Carter sprinted through the basement door, out into the backyard while we called the police. We hid behind a shed. Next thing I remember was the cops pulling 2 mid-30s-looking men out the house. We ran out from behind the shed and told the police everything. They were even shocked, but the 2 men said both of our names, and he was going to kill us when they get out. The officers asked them how they got our names, but they never said how. But one thing they did admit was that they were the ones on the phone and were planning to kidnap, rape, and murder both of us. He was talking to 12-year-old boys, Loke. We were sluts or something. Me and Carter are still best friends. And every time we hang out, we always think about that horrible experience.